On today's show, we are delving back into the Elite Prospects final rankings. The draft guide is now out, and we'll be highlighting some notable upside swings, some fallers, and some hidden gems later on in the draft.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this show, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. I'm your host, Sebastian High, the USHL scout over at Elite Prospects. And on today's episode, we'll be breaking down those rankings. We already did the first round breakdown. If you want to go watch that, it'll be linked in the description down below and in the cards up above. But if you've already watched that or are just interested in some more like later picks, like second round and onwards, to be highlighted here in this episode, this is the one for you, as we'll be really bringing some attention to some notable names everywhere between the second round and the seventh. So settle in, make yourselves comfortable, and we'll dive straight into this after saying that this episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. So in the first segment, we're going to be breaking down 6 upside swings. These are largely going to be players that I could see value in the second and third rounds, but also adding in a couple names further down the draft board. Then we'll move on to looking at some fallers or overall players that we are lower on than consensus at Elite Prospects, and kind of explaining why that might be the case. And finally, in the third segment, we'll be looking at the hidden gems, some names that may not be as flashy as other guys that are in this year's draft class, or maybe are just flying under the radar a bit, but we're going to give them a bit of attention there in the final segment. So let's just dive straight into the show here with 6 big upside swings outside the first round. And some of these players might get some looks in round 1 as well, but I think are most likely going to be second round candidates. And we're going to start off at 34th overall on our board at Elite Prospects with Ryker Lee, a Michigan State University commit who is playing with the Madison Capitals this season. And at 6 feet tall, 181 pounds as a right shot winger, this is one of the most skilled players in this year's draft class on handling ability alone. He can really stick handle in a phone booth, had the nickname of Magician when he was playing at Shattuck with Macklin Celebrini and Cole Iserman in the U14 program. And overall, I think that has followed him up to this point where he's at now as a draft eligible, highly skilled, really, really dynamic and creative, great playmaker, heavy shot, really like physical flashes as well later on in the season, where he was making a big difference on the forecheck and finishing his checks, and overall just being highly involved. He's a guy that I could easily see, at least myself, picking inside the first round. But in terms of where might go on draft day, the fact that he is a quite clearly subpar skater might hurt his valuation here a little bit, but he's in the middle of a big growth spurt. He's still growing actively, and he's grown about 6 or so inches in the last 3 years. This is definitely a guy who's still getting used to his frame and operating within that. I think that skating is going to improve just naturally over the coming seasons, and that's the biggest issue with this game right now. So that makes the possibilities quite exciting. At number 36 on the Elite Prospects board, we have Nathan Behm, a player from the WHL who lit things up in scoring this season, playing with the Kamloops Blazers, had 31 goals and 66 points in 59 games, but his first half scoring was really lights out, like really fantastic start to the campaign for this player. And he's at 6'2", 198 pounds as a right shot winger, a similar kind of profile there to Ryker Lee. But he's not a player who I think has quite as many issues in terms of the mobility, even though it isn't a strength. It's a bit wacky, a bit like choppy in terms of the skating mobility, but he's quite inside driven, has a wicked shot, great hands, great playmaking. The tools are really standout elements here, and he has some elements of like Pavel Dorofeyev in his game, and in terms of that goal scoring punch, but perhaps not being the most like two-way gifted player in the world. He's really an offense first guy, but really intelligent offensively. And he's a player that, in terms of pure skill and pure ability on the ice, could easily see himself picked inside the first round. But things were not the most consistent here this season, and that's going to have to take a step in order for him to go inside that like top 35 range on draft day. But we definitely see him as a high upside swing on day 2 of the draft. Then at 46th overall, a play that we've been talking a lot about here on the podcast, including a full scouting report, half-hour scouting report on Mason West, a player playing with the Fargo Force in the USHL. Will be spending one more season there with Fargo, developing his skills, while also playing as quarterback at the beginning of the season at Edina High School. There in Minnesota. He's a dual sport athlete who only like fully committed to hockey as being his sport of choice a couple weeks ago. So very recent development there for this player, but very exciting. He has elite level mobility at 6'6", 207 pounds as a right shot winger. He's an August 3rd birthday, so one of the younger players in this class, and he's extremely raw. He's a big time project. You're gonna have to wait and allow him to just develop on his own for quite some time before he's going to threaten to crack a roster out of training camp. But once he does, this might be a player who could eventually be a second line guy, and he's going to have to learn a lot more physical habits and like getting lower in his stance and bending his knees more often, especially when engaging in battles, to really like hold his own in those situations. But those things should be able to naturally progress as he focuses on hockey as his primary sport. It has to be noted that this is a guy who's been splitting his attention between hockey and football for his entire teenage years here. So in the coming seasons, I'm expecting some really big leaps in his development, and he's a guy that could definitely see some eyes on day 1 of the draft as well, inside that top 32. But at number 70 on our board at Elite Prospects, we have Everett Baldwin, a very mobile right shot defenseman who skates like the wind and is a really hard competitor as well. The thing that impressed me the most when he moved up from playing prep school hockey to playing with the NTDP this season, at the end of the campaign, was how good he fared in physical battles around the net front. He gets really low in his stance, good leverage mechanics, doesn't get himself like pushed out of position easily at all. He's a sturdy player, even though he's not the biggest at 6 feet and 174 pounds as a right shot defenseman. But the handling skill could really shine, especially against prep competition. But the dynamic activations, that two-way impact, to me, he was the best offensive defenseman coming out of the USHL this campaign, because he has this level of intelligence and foresight and overall creativity on puck as well. And he's able to layer handling and skating together beautifully in terms of dissecting defensive structures. He's a very exciting player that may very well be available in the 4th round on draft day, maybe even the 5th round. And if you can get him in that range, I think it's found money. Like a really, really talented player who is committed to playing with Providence College in 26-27, and definitely a guy that I would be keeping an eye on here as he pursues his development in the coming seasons. But moving on, we have another undersized player who's maybe a bit undervalued as a result of that stature, and that's Philippe Veilleux out of the QMJHL with the Val d'Or Foreurs. He's a 5'9", 165-pound left shot winger, quite young for the draft class as well, or not quite, but a March 26th birthday, and he scored like in droves this season there with Val d'Or. 40 goals, 87 points in 64 games. Really, really terrific production. And he's such a dynamic player, whether it's through his shot, his playmaking. He's a really adaptable offensive piece who I think has significant potential on the offensive side of the puck. There's definitely still a lot of room to grow in his game in terms of diversifying and gaining on the physical side and becoming a bit more of a separation speed guy in terms of how quickly he moves his feet, but a very intelligent offensive creator who's able to really just pull apart defensive structures with what he reads. Makes very quick reads, good scanner, constantly trying to make look-offs and deceive his opponents as well. He uses his intelligence to pull defenders out of position and exploit the spaces that they that they leave behind them. So a guy I think that definitely has significant potential as an intelligent, gifted offensive creator at the next level. But that physical side of the game, the motor, these things are going to have to improve if he wants to hit that upside. But if you can get a player with this level of skill and offensive intelligence in the 4th or 5th round, where he will likely be available, I think that's a great range for this player, who has reminded me at some points this season of Justin Poirier from last season's draft, who's definitely raised his stock after being selected there by the Carolina Hurricanes. But last but not least, for this first segment, we have a player who might be a bit of a deeper cut. His name is Oliver Turner. He's a 6'5", 194-pound right shot defenseman. Hasn't really been on many boards this season. He's only ranked by us at Elite Prospect at 131st overall, and by NHL Central Scouting as the 158th top North American skater. And he spent this season with St. Andrews College playing prep school hockey in Canada. And he's a very mobile player. He's physically engaged. A lot to like in terms of his profile overall. There's quite a lot of skill in his game. Disruptive performances, really just like constantly there at the prep level. And he got a little cup of coffee in the OHL as well with the Erie Otters. And the first of those games I thought was terrific, like really, really quite good, where aggressive rush defending, controlling gaps really well, keeping the inside positioning, forcing rushers towards the outside lane, really just dominating that middle lane defensively, but also like showing off some ability as a breakout passer and sparking plays from behind his own net. But the second game was a lot more difficult. Definitely clear that he was still getting used to the pace of play in the OHL. It was off a back-to-back as well, which has to be noted. But overall, even though there were growing pains and decision-making flaws and inconsistencies in that performance, he was able to show this season that, yeah, he's a raw player. He's going to need quite a few years to develop. He's committed to playing with Colgate University in 26-27. But overall, I think he's a guy that could be a really good value swing in like the 5th to 7th round of this year's draft class, and bring that mobility, physicality, good defensive habits, and some breakout ability as well as a big boy defenseman. But that wraps up this first segment. In the next one, we're going to be looking at some fallers on our board and guys that we have lower than other outlets, and kind of just showing you and explaining why that might be the case. So stay tuned for that. But first, a quick message from our sponsors here at Locked On NHL Prospects. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is not just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. When I started using Monarch, I realized just how much I was spending on food delivery. Now I budget smarter and save more. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year. All right, let's keep this episode rolling here in the second segment, breaking down some of the fallers on our board, players who have gotten quite a bit of hype this season and may find themselves at so low to a point that you, as a reader of the draft guide, or just as a person curious enough to tune into this show, might ask yourself, like, why are these players so low on our personal rankings? And we're going to start off at 35th overall with William Moore, a player I watched a lot this season. And this isn't necessarily like a ranking that's out of place. It's honestly right in the midst of where he's being ranked here at the end of the campaign. But it's quite a big divergence from where he's ranked earlier in the season. He was very much a top 15 player coming into this draft year, and now he finds himself at 35th overall on our board. And he's a very intelligent player. He's quite toolsy. He's a good skater, good handler, has a really good shot on him, and quite a capable playmaker as well when push comes to shove. But he's definitely a guy who's still growing into his frame. So in terms of projecting him to the NHL, it's all about that projection, right? Trying to see, how is this player going to look once you add another 20, 25 pounds to his frame? That's the player that you want to take a risk on draft day, not the player he is right now. Right now, he flashes a lot of really intriguing things, but it just hasn't all come together in the most cohesive way just yet. But he is committed to playing with Boston College. He's currently a 26-27 commit, but I would expect him to accelerate that to 25-26 at this point, especially with where the quality of competition in the USHL is going to be next season, significantly lower than in past campaigns. And I think that he's a guy that's going to be able to take some big steps in his years after being drafted, but there's definitely an aspect of risk here. So if you want a high upside swing in the second round, William Moore might be your guy, but there's also a chance that the physicality doesn't quite catch up and his game doesn't quite like coalesce into one cohesive thing at the next level. So a bit of risk, but definitely still enough skill to warrant a high-end second round selection. Moving on, we have Jack Nesbitt of the Windsor Spitfires, a 6'4", 183-pound left shot center who works very hard and is very heavy on the forecheck and might see some real interest inside the first round as a big centerman in a draft class that doesn't have so many in the back half of the first round. So you might see Jack Nesbitt go inside that range. But for us at EP, we see his projection almost exclusively as a bottom 6-1. And that makes him a second round talent in our eyes because he's a guy that brings quite a few qualities that teams are going to like. But even though he's a good pressure pusher, has a nonstop motor, has this intensity and physicality to him, there's not all that much like play driving or offensive driving in his game. He's not the most creative player. He's a guy that I think is going to have to be carried by line mates if he's ever going to play on like a third or second line in the NHL in terms of carrying the burden of gaining offensive entries and creating through pace and dynamism. That just is not Jack Nesbitt's game. And that's kind of why we have him a bit lower than other outlets do, because we prioritize players that we see more potential in, more upside, more likelihood of becoming a true difference maker in the NHL ahead of Jack Nesbitt. But then we have Ivan Ryabkin, a player that we have ranked at 52nd overall on our board. And he's a 6 foot, 201 pound left shot center who plays with utter violence. This is a guy who is chasing hits all year long, a guy who plays with anger and ferocity and scored a bunch of goals after coming over to the USHL. In 27 games played in the regular season, he posted 19 goals and 30 points, including 70 penalty minutes. A guy who was definitely aggressive, found himself in the penalty box very often. In the playoffs, he scored 7 goals and 16 points in 14 games en route to a Clark Cup championship with Muskegon, and he also had 30 penalty minutes there. So a player who's definitely finding himself in the penalty box a lot, and a guy whose motor and pace have concerned me all year long. This is kind of why he's fallen so far down our draft board after beginning this season as a top 5, top 10 contender on many draft boards. Just too many question marks here for me personally. A player that, even though he has a very good shot, even better playmaking, and rampant physicality, doesn't have the energy, the motor to support that style of play in a super effective way. And on puck as well, a player who lacked a lot of pace in my viewings. He could thread a needle on a pass, but it would be after standing still with the puck on a stick on the power play for 5 seconds, trying to find that perfect pass and trying to look off and try to like open up a passing lane that just one less stick were blocking it. And he can thread needles in those passes. The passing ability is very impressive, but he has to be able to learn to do that at a high pace in order to project as a top 9 creator in the NHL. Otherwise, I mainly just see a very angry fourth line guy who's able to hit you very hard and apply pressure. But again, the motor is going to have to come some ways, even for that projection. At 62 on our board, we have Carter Amico of the NTDP, a big physical right shot defenseman who missed most of the season to injury after a November knee surgery. A guy I covered in a scouting report on this channel as well, if you want to tune into that. But definitely a player that has some upside to him. There's a special quality in terms of the plays he's able to spot, the overall play killing ability defensively, especially something that stands out. And that combination of physicality and mobility is truly a plus level projection. But the health is a big point of concern with this player. The re-aggravating of past injuries, the overall susceptibility to getting injured even early on in campaigns before the physicality ramps up massively. He's a guy that I just see as a player who has a degree of upside and potential, but also has just struggled to stay healthy. And even when he has been on the ice this season, the on-puck decision-making left a lot of points for concern. And even though he does have some second pairing upside, if everything turns out in his game, and I really want it to, I think this player plays the game the right way. He thinks the game quite well. He's a guy I'd love to see make it to the NHL, but I just have some concerns. So he fell to 62nd there on our final rankings at Elite Prospects. Staying in the USHL, we have Adam Benák of the Youngstown Phantoms at 102nd on our board. Very low. I'm sure that you can agree to that, but he's a 5'7", 161-pound left shot center. Played a lot at right wing this season as well, where I thought he played better. And he's a player that I think where a lot has to break right in order for him to crack the NHL full time. He has a wicked motor. He's a very intelligent player, but he could also really struggle to produce from the middle of the ice. This was almost exclusively a perimeter playmaker this season, and that's a molded player that struggles often to translate to the professional levels, especially at the NHL physicality and pace. But in terms of his work rate, in terms of his intelligence, he has these assets that could buoy him all the way up into the NHL someday, and I'd love to see it. He's a very fun player, but there's definitely some concerns in terms of what he still has to develop in his game to project to that level, despite having difference-making intelligence and intensity to him. Then we have at 109, Jack Ivankovic, a goaltender here to highlight. He's a University of Michigan commit for next season, and at 6 feet tall, 179 pounds as a left shot goaltender, he's undersized, and this is one of the reasons he'll be falling on draft day relative to where his talent might land him. But we have him very, very low. We have quite a few scouts on our team that have watched him significantly more than I have, who have significant doubts in how he's going to project to higher levels. But it should also be noted that his father is like 6'5", so don't rule out a late growth spurt that could also help him with some of his deficiencies in goal right now. But personally, I've always quite liked his intelligence, his overall demeanor in net, the confidence as well. But overall, he's definitely a player who fell here for us at Elite Prospects, and we think that the combination of size and the situation of where he's been playing for the last couple of seasons supported his draft stock significantly. Then to wrap up this segment, we have Luka Radivojevic, who's going over to Boston College next season, playing with the Muskegon Lumberjacks this campaign. He's a puck-moving right shot defenseman who stands at 5'10", 168 pounds, and he put up 3 goals and 22 points in 38 games this season in the USHL after coming over from Sweden. He's a guy who moves wonderfully well. There's a real degree of passing ability with this guy as well. But I think that the combination of small profile, small stature, and a lack of offensive dynamism might be an Achilles heel in terms of an NHL projection and where he might fall on draft day. So we have him at 129th on our board, and a player that we definitely see has merit in terms of being drafted, but the likelihood of him hitting is just a little bit mitigated here by his combination of a lack of offensive dare and lack of size. So that wraps things up here for our second segment. In the final one, we're going to wrap things up with the hidden gems. We have 7 prospects to highlight there from our rankings at Elite Prospects. But first, a quick message from our sponsors here at Locked On NHL Prospects. All right, let's wrap up the show here in the final segment, highlighting 7 hidden gems from this year's draft class. And I tried to spread these out a little bit. Some of these are second round guys, others are third and fourth rounders, other guys might not even get drafted, but I just wanted to kind of get some breadth here in players that might have some sneaky value on draft day that we have ranked. And one player that we do not have ranked, but we do have included in the draft guide here from our rankings at Elite Prospects. So to kick us off at 43rd overall on our board, we have Hayden Paupanekis. He's a big 6'4", 203-pound right shot forward playing with the Kelowna Rockets. He can play at center and he can play on the wing, but he's been playing a lot down the middle this season. And after being traded from Spokane to Kelowna midway through the season, his production improved a little bit, but overall the production wasn't the big selling point this season, but still a guy who plays with intensity, very middle-driven guy, and I love the handling skill. This is a player who was able to just like work his way to the front of the net, quick hands to beat the goaltender one-on-one, good puck protection mechanics. He's a big, powerful guy that I think could really be a good third line piece in the NHL down the road. And he has the physicality, certainly kills plays on the back checks. He's very proactive on both sides of the puck, which I really appreciate in his game. And he's a guy that might be even higher on my personal board than where we had him at EP. But moving on, at number 47 on our board, we have David Bedkowski, a very, very violent defenseman at 6'5", 214 pounds, and a right shot. He has a profile that NHL teams are going to really like, and even though his production was not really there this season, with 3 goals and 7 points in 37 games, but still a guy that is just incredibly physical. He punishes opponents. He hurts them. He has more than just a mean streak. He's a really, really violent player, and he flashes a lot of confidence in the offensive zone too, with like quick one-touch passes, give-and-go plays. He connects play quite well and has an absolutely like ferocious one-timer to boot. So a very fun profile of a guy who hits hard, shoots hard, plays mean, skates quite well, and I think is going to be an NHLer in some capacity at least, but very possibly as well as a number 5, maybe even number 4 in an NHL defensive core. But moving on, at 71st overall, we have Cooper Simpson of the University of North Dakota, where he's committed to next season. And this season, he split his time between Shakopee High in Minnesota high school circuit and the Tri-City Storm in the USHL. And when he arrived in the USHL, he was dynamite. He scored 7 goals and 1 assist in 9 games there after getting the call up. And very good skater, quick hands, very skilled player. I think that the combination of playmaking and goal scoring ability is really quite dynamic as well. And he's an explosive skater as well. I think that the transition ability and the upside there is really quite impressive, and definitely a player I would consider drafting even in the late second round. In like the mid second round, you could probably convince me as well. The skill is quite convincing, but we have him lower because there's an element of risk with his profile. There's definitely a lot of inconsistency still with how he plays the game of hockey, and definitely a player that's going to have to gain some of that to project to an NHL role. But if he is able to make it to the NHL, I think that he's definitely a guy that could push his way up into a middle 6 capacity. He has the skill, he has the quick processing, he has the ability to work in tight plays, quick give and goes, and support line mates rather than just going on solo incursions as a handler, which he can do, but he doesn't have to lean on either. Definitely a fun player to keep an eye on in the middle rounds on draft day. Next, we have a player that may not even get picked on draft day, and that's Maddox Labre of the Victoriaville Tigres in the QMJHL, a very mobile left shot defenseman who plays with aggression and dare on both sides of the puck. He has a real good ability at defending one-on-ones, and overall in terms of the activations is quite deceptive on puck as well. He's been the absolute favorite of our QMJHL scout and former host here on the podcast, Hattie Kalikesh, this season, who was banging the table for him meeting after meeting after meeting this campaign, and definitely went to bat for a player who, again, might not even get looks on draft day, but may grow into a role that gets drafted in a year or two, and definitely a guy to keep an eye on as a deeper cut in this year's class. Next, we have Brady Peddle of the Waterloo Blackhawks, a very physical 6'3", 203-pound left shot defenseman who we had ranked over at 82nd overall, and he was a late riser, a really late riser, the latest riser on our board. It was very much his run to the championship finals with Waterloo there, where they ended up losing to Muskegon, that convinced us about just how good of a play killer he is, how well he uses his combination of mobility and physicality to keep play to the outside. And he's also flashed a better ability to create in the offensive zone, not always in flashy ways, but with hard shots aiming for rebounds or quick little look-offs at the blue line to move the puck to his defensive partner in more space than he would have otherwise had. These little details are quite impressive, and it led him to scoring 9 points in the last 10 games of the playoffs after scoring just 10 points in 62 regular season games. So a guy that definitely worked his way up our board there late in the season. And I can tell you it went down to after our meeting for him to get bumped up all the way to 82nd overall after we sprinted in some final last minute viewings on this player. But a player I really appreciated this season and think he could be a really serviceable physical bottom pairing left shot defenseman who moves the puck well and hits very hard. Next, we have Nathan Quinn of the Quebec Remparts in the QMJHL, a 5'10", 168-pound right shot centerman who thinks the game exceptionally well. He's a very young player for the draft class, an August 29th birthday, and he's a player that, while he does think the game tremendously, he supports play really, really intuitively, thinks the game at a very high extent, he doesn't have the special skill to really make him a higher player on our draft board. So he did finish at 125th overall, one of the last players that we squeezed into our rankings. But the way he plays the game in terms of supportive habits, in terms of effort level, in terms of processing speed, just made him impossible to miss for us in our viewings this campaign. And definitely a player to keep an eye on with a late round swing this season, is a guy that if he's able to build out a bit more dynamism and skill and dare on puck in the coming seasons, and he has a bit more runway than other players this draft class to do so, he could be quite an exciting, intelligent two-way bottom six projection in the NHL. But again, the skill has to take a step to get him there. Last but not least, we have a player that we did not rank at elite prospects, but did come quite close to there in the end, and that's Mikhail Katin, a big 6'4" left shot defenseman, 204 pounds, from the Omaha Lancers in the USHL. A guy who only put up 2 goals and 4 points this season in 59 games, playing on a horrid team there in Omaha this campaign. Just nothing was working there in that team. I mean, like, they lost their last 10 games of the season. They lost probably more than that in that last losing streak. By far the worst team in the league this campaign. But Katin moves very well. This is a powerful player who, inconsistent, but in flashes was able to really leverage his physicality both as a puck protector but also as a play killer defensively. Was able to really be a rover defensively and cover a lot of ice and cover for teammates on odd man rushes. Moves his feet very well, and he's going to have to improve, especially as a handler and in terms of his breakout passing, to project to the next level. But a player I think could be a really valuable 7th round draft swing who just kind of refines into your perfect physical, smooth skating bottom pair guy at the next level. There are some shades of guys like Nico Mikkola in his game. I think he could get there at some point in his career. But that wraps things up here for the episode today. Thank you so much for tuning in here. As always, I would love to hear about your thoughts down below. What are your takeaways from our rankings or our draft guide over at Elite Prospects, which is, of course, linked below if you have yet to read it. And let me know as well what your thoughts are on the players that we brought up in today's episode. Are there some really good hidden gems in here? Are there players that you think should not have fallen as far as they did? And are there players that have even higher upside than I expect them to have? I would love to hear of your perspectives in the comments down below. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please do make sure to make us your first listen of the day. We always appreciate our everydayers here on the show, so thank you for tuning in as always. But that wraps things up. That's everything from me today. I'm your host, Sebastian High, and I hope to catch you listening again very, very soon.